Hey, howdy, hey. Sorry, I'm not quite ready yet, but I didn't want to keep you waiting. So, I'm gonna do a little POV because last time I streamed here, the car was facing outward, so that it's better for the live stream, but the sun kept glaring in my eyes, and I decided, you know what? I just realized right as I came out, um, the car's flipped around the wrong way. So I want to flip it around. Last live stream, last live stream, there were so many people asking me to drive around during the broadcast. So I thought it might be fun to do, even if it's very short. Let's see, how much will the stream crash by me doing this? Uh, what could I do? I think I'll back in this way. Hopefully this doesn't crash the stream. It probably will. Can I make that turn? How good is the turning radius here? We finna about to find out. Oh, that was the water bottle. I was worried it was the camera. Do a flip. I'm flipping around. Bringing it round town so we can back in here. Drew's first ever live stream in a moving Tesla. And it's very short, but it should mean the lighting is a bit more balanced. There's those ultrasonic sensors getting put to good use. Don't you dare look at us. Don't worry, I didn't even go on public roads. So I could legally leave my seatbelt off, right? All right. Let me turn this off. There you go. Should I stay in the driver's seat? That way I don't have to get out of the car. I don't know. We're gonna experiment with this. Do I have range anxiety yet? Yeah, I've been driving 2 feet. That's insane. Okay, I'm gonna move this up and show you guys actually exactly why. Stupid tripod. I'd like to show you exactly why I would want a yoke. Not only is it probably more comfortable for highway driving, but if I put my camera here so you guys can see me while I'm in the driver's seat, you'll notice the steering wheel's in the way. That's fun, isn't it? All right, let me move this over so the sound quality can be a little bit better. I don't know if it's perfect, but we're on, here's the driver profile. Let's go to easy entry. Where is easy entry? Oh, I know why. There. I just had to put it in park. Now it's even more in your face. Tesla has the best seatbelt chimes. I kind of have the Tesla mentality of the best seatbelt chime is no seatbelt chime. My wife still gets really annoyed anytime I put my foot on the brake before the before the her seatbelt is clicked because it starts doing that ding 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 ding, and she's like, "Stop it! That annoys me." I kind of get it. Sometimes the car's not even moving yet. It's like, don't beep at me unless I start moving. If I just put my foot on the brake, that shouldn't matter, right? Okay. Um, I don't know. I'm kind of discovering right now exactly why I don't stream from uh the driver's side here. As you can tell, it's kind of awkward. Let me maybe pivot this up a little bit. I guess you can't see the MacBook, so it doesn't really matter if the MacBook looks weird. Let me move this. Let me try. We're learning, okay? We're gonna learn this together. If I move it a little closer, no, that doesn't really fix it, does it? I could make a new driver profile called I'm live streaming. And I could set the steering wheel up a different way. Okay, we did a flip. We flipped the car around. And Okay, I wanted to kick off today's live stream. Obviously, let's address Lucid because Lucid hit some new records today. Um, record low, I'm afraid to say. I wish I could say they hit some kind of good record, but as of today, September 20th, Lucid has hit a they closed at $5.45, which is the lowest the stock price has ever been. Luckily, it's up about 1% after hours, but this beats their previous record that was $5.47 back on June 23rd. And on top of that, there's been reports of not very good delivery numbers for the month of August and July. Apparently, a 40% drop in registrations, according to it was a registration site. I think it was what is it pronounced? Equifax, something like that. But basically, a company that tracks vehicle registrations reported a very, very low registration number for Lucid. And all I'm going to say now, because I've done many videos explaining as to why Lucid's in trouble, why they're not doing that great, and issues that I don't foresee how they can possibly overcome. My viewpoint on them has forever now shifted towards Lucid will only survive because the Saudis think it looks pretty. I have no idea why the Saudis keep investing so much in Lucid. I don't think the Saudis are stupid. I don't think they like to burn money, and obviously they can see the stock price of this brand. Um, so why would they keep pouring money into this dying company that is clearly struggling to find buyers, doesn't have that luxurious of an interior um, compared to the Mercedes S-Class that it wants to be compared to, doesn't have the charging consistency of the Teslas that it wants to be compared to. So it just makes it such an incredibly hard sale at its existing prices, and even with those existing prices, it is not profitable. So they're having to cut prices further just to try to get vehicles out the door, and the latest registration data is proving that even the price cuts aren't working. So pretty much in my head, like the only way this company lives is wait a minute, why are the headlights on? I have lights setting. Okay, they were set to off, but the headlights were still on. I just changed them. Anyway, um why would someone invest in Lucid, I guess is my question. They think something's going to change with Project Gravity. I mean, yes, there was technically. Oh, let me mute myself for a second. Sorry, I was just plugging you into the Tesla, so you all MacBook battery wouldn't die on me. But Gravity ramping up production is going to burn through even more cash. And considering the environment that Gravity is going up against, I don't think it's in a good position because it's probably going to be a high priced vehicle. Probably. Why would it be cheaper than the Lucid Air? Like, for one, I mean, if they wanted to actually make a product that would succeed, it would have to be, right? And yet, uh, I don't foresee, because of how complicated it is and its bigger vehicle probably requires bigger battery pack, and they're going to be putting in more luxurious features. There's no way they can profitably sell the Gravity at a lower price than the Lucid Air. And it's going up against the Rivian R1S, which has already ramped up production a lot, and now the Model X, which is not particularly, the most luxurious vehicle on the road, but it is a high-end EV with decent range, decent charging, and it just got massive price cuts. Now the entry-level Model X qualifies for the federal tax credit, so it's not like the Lucid Oh, also it's going up against the Kia EV9, which a lot of people have interest in. I know GM's working on some more expensive three-row electric SUVs. You've got the Cadillac, which isn't really luxurious, the Lyric, but it's premium, I would say. But then you've got uh, what's the name of the brand? GM has too many sub brands. I can't keep track of. But it's already a competitive market, is what I'm trying to say. Tesla's having to slash prices across the board just to try to get people to buy the $80,000 Model X. And I don't foresee a scenario where the Gravity is going to be $80,000. So It's yeah, and the rates suck for interest rates. So if you're trying to get people to take out loans to buy your vehicle, it's not a great bet. I think man, I'm trying to think what could Lucid do? What would I do if I was in Lucid's shoes? I guess probably do what Peter Rawlinson is doing and just collect the fattest possible paycheck you can. He's the highest paid automotive CEO in the industry right now, which is funny because he's running the least profitable automotive company right now. Watching the Saudis throw money at Lucid is like watching a gambler always bet with unfit. Yeah, it's like what's his name? Austin Powers. I also like to live dangerously. You know, he's just making all the wrong bets. Um, but seeing it close at 545 was quite shocking to me because it means that even if you bought Lucid stock before the IPO, before they did the SPAC merger and everything, nobody has made a profit now on Lucid stock. Even if you bought it day one, even if you bought it before the IPO, it's lost 50% of its value. And if, of course, there's a bunch of people that bought it right after the IPO, and yeah, it just tanked horribly. Um, how do they have the stones to even think about doing Model 3 or Model Y segments when they are on the line of death? I don't understand. I guess the investment is the most confusing part to me. Um, I guess if the company has cash on hand, then it would make sense to continue spending money on engineering and develop plans, and I suppose keep building vehicles even if no one is buying them. But I I guess I'm most confused with like why is there still investment coming in? What investors are seeing a future with this and not with any of the other companies that of course I would like to see succeed, whether it be Aptera or Canoe, um, that are offering a lot more promise or a lot more originality in my head that there's actually demand for those vehicles. Um, but you know, diamond hands, right? Lucid to the moon. I remember just 3 or 4 months ago, Peter Rawlinson in some kind of online interview was saying, I think from here on out, we're going to be seeing the stock price now climb in the opposite direction. And here we are, and it's even lower, investing out of spite. An Arab Mercedes. I do feel like they must just like the way it looks. You know, the Saudis, I think, wanted Lucid to build their own factory as well, um, in Arabia. And I don't really think that's a great location in regards to supply chains, labor force, and cost and permits and all that. So I think they're purely just doing it as like we own you now because the Saudis are clearly majority stakeholder and they're probably going to continue to be because Lucid's probably going to start. Well, I know they started. They announced this a while ago, but Lucid has been selling their own stock to keep the company afloat, which is usually not a good sign for the company if you're having to liquidate your own shares. It's like even the company doesn't want to keep their stocks. So I really genuinely hope, for one, if they really wanted to turn around demand, I think addressing the biggest elephant in the room would be switching to NACS and building in a um, some kind of inverter box that does what GM does with the Hummer EV, so that they can access the supercharger network and actually get peak speeds. Um, I know that that's going to require additional engineering and additional maintenance and, you know, a change in parts design, and the factory is going to need to be updated. But here's the thing. It doesn't make sense to keep making what you're making if no one's buying it. Like you're already shooting yourself in the foot, in my opinion, by building more cars, which as far as I can tell with Lucid's, you know, manufacturing numbers and their cash on hand and what they're burning, they're spending like $2 million a car. So even if they sold these things for $1 million a piece, there's no buyers for that. But even if they did, it still wouldn't be enough. Um, so I would say you need a drastic change in direction. You need to stop what you're doing, slam the brakes, you know, maximize that regen and update the vehicles. Maybe you could say, we're going to take a pause to incorporate some updates to our vehicles. Maybe while you're at it, try to find a way to cut some costs, improve that build quality, or, you know, fix some things. But while you're at it, you gotta add NACS, you gotta build in supercharger network support, because no one's going to care about your high efficiency and your high range numbers if you're stuck with Walmart Electrify America charging. I know that their current vehicles with their higher voltage architecture are not properly designed. So the CCS Lucid vehicles, they can't go to a Magic Dock supercharger and get more than about 40, 50 kilowatts, which is not great. So they need to build in the equipment to take advantage of this far superior charging network. That's the main reason I think they're losing out on buyers. I saw Out of Spec Dave is selling his Lucid, although he buys and sells cars all the time, so that shouldn't be a huge surprise. But um, they really need to just rethink the strategy. I think basically anything changing at this point would be better than what they're doing. Um, Keeping around CCS on vehicles this expensive is a mistake and a massive one. And it's just going to cost their investors a ton of money. And in my view, the only reason this company is alive is because the Saudis thinks it's a pretty looking car. That's pretty much it. Um, Ryan Scholar says, sorry if I mispronounced that. Rear-wheel drive Model 3 for $11,000 off with referral, tax credit, inventory discount. Oh, all put together. Pull the trigger, wait till end of Q3. I guess the question you need to ask yourself is how badly do you like the Highland refresh? Which is really a question of how badly do you want gear stocks? That's what you really got to ask. I would say if I was in your shoes, I'm a little biased because I'm in the pre-refresh Model 3 right now, but yeah, I'd pull the trigger. You could wait for the Highland refresh, but the truth is, the rumors are it won't be ready till next year. And by next year, we don't know if that means January or February or March. I just retweeted. Someone saw one in California. So we know that Fremont is toying with it. They're trying to retrofit the factory. So here's hoping that they can shut it down over the holiday period and start deliveries of the refresh Model 3 in very early January. Like, New Year's Day would be nice. And that way it'd be very easy to refer to the Model 3s in the future. You could just refer to all of the refreshed ones as the 2024 Model 3, and then you don't have some weird overlap where, well, some of the 2023 Model 3s have the refresh. But if you're not that interested in the refresh, then I guess getting one at a discount is a pretty good deal because the Highland refresh is probably going to come with a price hike, in my opinion. It pretty much got a price hike in all other countries. I think in China it was like a 12% price increase. Um, and then once there's a huge wave of demand coming in, which because it's the United States, I bet there will be, because we have the federal tax credits on the Model 3, and we know that the Highland is coming because we saw all the announcements and we saw all the new updates overseas. So there's probably a big hold off on ordering for a lot of people. And then once the American market gets the option launched, then you'll get a huge wave of orders, and then Tesla will probably increase the price a couple more times. So if your main goal is cost savings, then yeah, but I would say wait as long as you can. There were some people saying that, like, I'm on my Tesla lease right now and I'm trying to hold off until Highland, but then I'm not going to have a car for the next 3 months. Okay, you don't necessarily have to wait for Highland if you're not that interested in it, but at, at least wait till the end of the quarter because there's probably going to be some last minute discounts and some last minute perks that tends to happen whenever Tesla's at an end of quarter push. That's usually when they're like, okay, we're going to throw in free charging and we're going to throw in free full self driving or something. And you might be able to get a little bit of a vehicle. So if it's not your only vehicle, then I'd say wait, if you can afford to wait. Um, Let's see. Are you going to trade in your Tesla for the new Project Highland Tesla or Cybertruck? Sorry, it's not that kind of channel. I'm not like out of spec buying and selling cars every other month. I am a buy and hold kind of guy. I'm the same way with stock as I am with cars. I have bought Tesla stock years ago. I haven't sold a single share, and I don't plan on selling shares anytime soon. And I bought this car over a year ago, and I don't plan on selling it anytime soon. I love this car. I was driving around a lot this morning, actually. And Highland is great. I love Project Highland. I'm very excited. As a fan of sedans, I think it's a beautiful vehicle, and I agree with people saying it's the best car on earth. It looks fantastic, but it's gonna. I know I'm gonna lose money on the transaction if I try to sell this car and buy the new one because the new one's gonna be more expensive, and this one's not gonna sell for anywhere close to what I paid for it. So I can't justify spending whatever the difference would be. It'd probably be a difference of maybe 5,000, maybe 10,000, maybe $20,000 difference, just so I have an ambient light strip and ventilated seats. Those are cool features, but I'm not willing to drop that much money on it. I'm happy with the car I have, but I also don't need a Cybertruck. I'm just not a pickup truck kind of guy. Is the Model 3 cometh to Europe? It's pretty much only in Europe right now, and China and Asia. Sorry, China and Australia. Um, Elon exposed these flaws and predicted Lucid's downfall back in June of last year on the Tesla owner's Silicon Valley podcast. Yeah, I'd say he was right about Lucid, but probably wrong about Rivian. He also insisted that Rivian was doomed for bankruptcy, and I don't think they are. They're not in a very similar situation. Rivian has a lot more revenue coming in. They have a lot more vehicles on the road. They're ramping more successfully. They have a lot more cash in the bank, and they have a path towards profitability with their R2 platform. So I don't agree with Elon's thoughts on Rivian, but I do agree with him on Lucid, that's for sure. Gravity needs to launch with Next. Yeah, to me, Gravity is going to be dead on arrival if it has the CCS port. I really hope they talk about that soon. Frankly, the Lucid Air is struggling to find buyers already, so if they don't have some path towards Nax, they're busted. Um, let's see. Love to see remain an option outside of innovating. Jump on the Tesla charging train. Not like if you took 3 years and bested Tesla tech, we wouldn't look to adopt that better tech. The problem is Lucid just focused too much on the vehicle and not enough on the infrastructure, which is a rookie mistake, I would say. Just assuming that the charging infrastructure is good enough and you don't have to do any work or put any effort into that. That's not true. It's the same flawed process with hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Everybody's too focused on the vehicle, not focused enough on the infrastructure. People just think, oh, well, yeah, hydrogen, you can fit a lot of energy in that pressurized tank, and then you can go really far. So, therefore, hydrogen better than electric because long range. It's like, okay, where does that hydrogen come from? Who's going to be refilling those hydrogen stations? How much energy is it going to take to pressurize that hydrogen and transport that hydrogen? And there's just inherently, there's no way in my mind, no one has convinced me yet otherwise, that there's any conceivable way to make hydrogen fuel cells economical compared to electric vehicles. For one, fuel cell vehicles still need pretty big battery packs. They still rely on electric motors, and hydrogen at this point in its current forms costs more than gasoline. So it's already a hard sale for a lot of people to go to an EV just because of how different it is. Now imagine if EVs were not cheaper to own over the long haul. What if, right now we're trying to justify the higher expense by saying that, well, charging an EV is cheaper than paying for gas. Imagine if charging an EV was twice the price of gas. It would be a much harder sale, and that's basically what hydrogen is. And that applies to all form factors, by the way. Whether it's a sedan, a pickup truck, or a semi truck, hydrogen costs more. So that's why I have a harder time getting around it because you're going to need a lot of electricity and energy to harness that hydrogen in a way that the vehicle can accept, transport that hydrogen, build out the hydrogen refueling network. Like all of that energy would be better off spent just charging a battery pack. You could bypass all of those steps. We already have an electrical grid. We have infrastructure designed for electricity as is. Um, so I just, I've yet to hear a compelling argument in favor of hydrogen. Um, yeah, I'm like Giovanni. I don't understand how it's still part of the discussion. I don't get how there's still companies thinking about doing that or talking about doing that. It's like, have you put any thought into this whatsoever? Um, Jackson Smith says the blue LED strip on the Cybertruck looks so good. It was in a video put out where Elon drove around with the Israeli president. Yeah, I saw it. I think it was in my last video actually because we were talking about how the Cybertruck is stealing the 4680 cells now, and the Model Y 4680 is no longer available. But yeah, we've seen one interior shot of the Cybertruck with red ambient lighting, and now we've seen another one with blue. So it's likely the same RGB lighting setup as the Highland. And we also, Gregor Truck saw a brief view, I think, of a blind spot indicator. I think the Cybertruck is going to have those too, which means that, if the Model 3 got it, why shouldn't the Cybertruck get it? Um, Rivian is the only successful startup. I guess if you're referring to just right now, yeah, I get because I don't consider Tesla a startup anymore. I mean, they're definitely much younger and much newer than legacy automakers, but I think they've surpassed the point of startup phase. Rivian is definitely still in startup phase, but they're doing great. Um, let's see. Got a Model 3 made in China standard range in Portugal 4 months ago. It's unbelievably good. Made in China cars are great. I'm totally with you. I wish I could get a made in China car here. I got a made in China battery pack, I guess. But yeah, a lot of people have a negative stigma when it comes to anything that's manufactured in China. People just assume that must mean it's cheap and poorly made, and honestly, I'm afraid it's quite the opposite. American factories are known for having much more build quality issues and uh, fine build it fit and finish issues and that kind of thing, whereas the made in China stuff has been excellent, and they can update stuff much quicker, which is why I think Project Highland is starting off as a made in China option, and it's taking a lot longer to get Fremont switched over because Fremont is not as well optimized as Giga Shanghai. Other than Toyota, who makes hydrogen cars? I think Nikola, for some reason, they're still alive. Even after the whole Trevor Milton thing, they're still sticking around. But I don't understand. I don't understand why they're still talking about doing hydrogen. They've already built a few electric semi trucks, which have very poor aerodynamics because they are designed for low speed transport. They've delivered semi trucks. They're on the road, which is nice, but basically the Nikola Tre, which is all battery powered, there's no hydrogen, is optimized for lower speed cargo transport, and it's not meant for high range. Whereas the Tesla Semi is much more aerodynamic and optimized for long haul travel. Um, which thankfully we're finding out that Pepsi is using those and taking advantage of them. They're moving the Tesla Semi around with. I think there's been a few days they've reported over 600, 700, or I think one of these days they had an 800-mile drive where they were driving the semi around 800 miles in a single day. So different use cases, but Nikola is still talking about doing hydrogen fuel cell semi trucks, which again, they've been talking about doing it for years and they still haven't done it, but I still don't get it. Because the infrastructure cost is insane. Trying to find a way to build out hydrogen fuel cell networks that you have to refuel or use electrolysis to make hydrogen on site is going to require so much energy compared to just building a mega charger, which is what Tesla's doing. They built one in Modesto and they got another one in Bakersfield, and I'm sure as they expand the production for Tesla Semi, they'll put more and more mega chargers around. But that's going to use far less energy than the fuel cell trucks will use, and they can get comparable range now. We can prove that. Um, yeah, all iPhones are basically made in China. Although this year there's going to be a larger percentage of iPhones made in India, actually. So there's more production lines opening up. Um, hydrogen makes sense in Japan where they struggle to keep up with electricity demand, import all their oil, and generally struggle not to have blackouts. That's why Toyota still pushes hydrogen. My point is, hydrogen requires more electricity than electric vehicles because there is not a hydrogen infrastructure in place. So you can't just go to your local gas station and pick up a can of hydrogen. In order to get a big can of hydrogen, you need to use a bunch of electricity or maybe some other energy resource, which is probably not as environmentally friendly. Maybe you're going to use fossil fuel or coal or whatever. Basically, you have to go through a fairly expensive process to get hydrogen out of water because it's, a very explosive, very dangerous element, and it's very light. It's the lightest element. So capturing that and storing that, you have to pressurize it to be able to fit it in a tank, and then you have to transport that hydrogen around to hydrogen refueling stations, which then also have to use electricity to store that hydrogen, and then use electricity to transport that hydrogen into the fuel cell vehicle. It's I don't get it. Like to use a to be pushing a hydrogen infrastructure in a situation where your grid is overwhelmed and taxed, you're going to be using more energy for hydrogen. That's why it doesn't make sense to me because there's way more energy losses with hydrogen. Where'd the internet go? Sorry, it just came back. I don't know why it shut off for a second. There we go. If they're struggling with electricity, they need EVs more than everyone else. Yeah. EVs at this point are so low on the overall grid energy consumption. Not that many people own EVs in the grand scheme of vehicle ownership. By far, the biggest tax on the electrical grid is primarily HVAC. If you look at, California when they were having their brownouts and stuff, and um, grid instability, and they were sending out text messages and notifications to everyone saying, "Hey, like turn off your AC or let it run hot, otherwise we're all going to lose power." That was, if you look at the graph of how many EVs were charged that day, it accounted for like 2% of the total electricity consumed by the grid. So I know there's a lot of concern about that, of like EVs are going to overwhelm the grid, but my point is, uh, there's people who say that don't have a firm understanding of how many gas vehicles are on the road, and they don't even understand that, like, okay, even if 100% of new car sales were electric, which it's not, by the way, it's not even 50%, but if 100% of new car sales were electric, it would still take 20 to 30 years before there weren't any gas cars left on the road. So, my point being, there's so many people that are not going to be driving an EV for many decades that, yes, over time, eventually, I'm sure electric vehicles will probably account for a huge percentage of electricity consumption. But as of right now, it's absurdly low. It's insanely low compared to HVAC systems, which pretty much every household has at least one or two. Some of them have huge ones, and especially when it gets very hot, people crank that AC, and that's what's chugging up most of the energy. Um, they struggle to meet electricity demand. They have vast hydrogen resources. True, it uses heaps of electricity. They're desperately trying to diversify. That's what I'm saying. What you just said doesn't make sense. What do you mean they have vast hydrogen resources? You don't like go mining for hydrogen. Mass hydrogen resources just means water, but it takes more electricity to turn it into hydrogen opposed to just charging a battery. Um, the situation in California makes it difficult to argue in favor of electric vehicles to naysayers. Well, I wouldn't even say naysayers as much. I would say the uninformed. Um, the funny thing is that California is probably where EV sales are doing the best. There's like a ton of EV sales here because California also has like the highest gas prices in the country. So there's a lot of financial incentive. There's state rebates and of course the federal tax credit. But if you look at which states have the highest percentage of EV sales, I think California's, if not number one, they're in like the top three or top four. Partly because there's so many people here. But I mean, anybody who's driven through a major city in California can attest. EVs are quite popular here. We don't have an issue convincing more of the public we need EVs, but the people who don't buy them are saying like, "Oh yeah, they're going to overwhelm the grid." But it's like, okay, if you don't have a grid, you can't pump gas either. So it's not like we can fix that. But um, their dependence on oil exporting countries are destabilizing. They want to create solar powered green hydrogen. I agree that it's pretty hopeless. I just don't think it's financially sound. I don't care what your political preferences are. Um, you're not going to sell people on hydrogen. The demand isn't there for it. I remember people talking about hydrogen fuel cell vehicles 10, 12 years ago. I watched a documentary not too long ago. It was a sequel to the Who Killed the Electric Car called Revenge of the Electric Car. And back in that documentary, there was still talk about how hydrogen might be the future. And we are years later and hydrogen sales are still like next to nothing, and it's because no one wants to front the bill for what a hydrogen infrastructure would cost. It's just way too expensive. It's not viable for the business and it's not viable for the customers. The only way they could convince customers to buy them is if they covered the price of the hydrogen. But that's not profitable. That's why they didn't sell that many of them. um he also says that he wants to focus on energy and make energy prices go down. Well, I wouldn't trust what a president says because that rarely goes anywhere. Um, Coal is still a sizable portion of our electric grid. Less and less, though, every year. It's a very decent chunk, but every year it's a little bit less. Um, Most of the energy usage in California, by the way, is still HVAC. Electric vehicles account for such a tiny percentage of the overall car fleet. And most people are not charging their EVs to full every day. If you think about it, for one, there's energy usage in gas stations and oil refining. We don't mention that too much, but okay. Um, but most people, on average, even in California, I think are driving between 30 to 40 miles per day. If EV, a fairly efficient one, is getting 3 to 4 miles per kilowatt hour, then that means the average EV driver in California is adding about, what, 10 kilowatt hours a day by driving an EV versus driving a gas car. 10 kilowatt hours is, is not nothing, but compared to what a lot of houses are using just to keep their interior cool, um, it's not like a game changing amount of energy. Uh, we're all on the subject. I'm curious if California also sells the most hydrogen cars. Maybe, but it's still probably incredibly low. I don't know. It's like, who's the fastest snail? It's not saying much. Who's the tallest dwarf in Lord of the Rings? Like, I don't know. It's the state probably with the most hydrogen vehicle sales, but I bet it's under 1,000. It might be under 100 actually. Matt says where I live, electricity is 49 cents a kilowatt peak. I might got you beat, Matt. I think I'm at like 50 cents kilowatt peak, but that's why I just don't charge a car during peak hours. That'd be horrible. And it's probably going to get worse. Um, Electricity demands are probably only going to go up, not down. And solar, as much as we'd like to stop paying for electricity, I don't think actually solves the problem, because solar doesn't fix the need for a grid. There needs to be some kind of infrastructure in place to support power systems and distribute that power. And putting solar on your roof, that energy, that excess energy that you put back into the grid, the transformers and the power lines around your house are not optimized to send that power everywhere it needs to go. So we've already seen this happen. My family members have been telling me about it in places like San Diego. They're actually, my relatives have solar, but they're charging people your energy bill based on your income, because they realize that with the solar system, the solar pricing, in effect, that the people who had a lot more disposable income to afford solar, uh, those people didn't want to have to pay their power bill. So they would pay for solar and expect their power bill to drop very low or to nothing. And then the people who are renting or can't afford solar, who don't have that much disposable income, they're basically having to pay more and more for electricity prices because the cost to maintain the grid and operate the grid is getting higher and higher. So the state of California did not like the concept that people with more money did not have to pay for the grid and people with less money did have to pay for the grid. So they were trying to find a way to rebalance that, and their solution was basically, we're going to charge people who make more for their electricity, which is kind of all over the place. But Mersey, thank you for 25 months of support. That's very generous of you. I saw an article about more lithium mines opening in Canada. I don't know much about it, but that would allow me as a Canadian to maybe get some federal incentives because the lithium was local. I don't know much about Canadian law, but I would think so. That sounds logical to me, but I don't know. You can't expect governments to be logical. So, E for Electric said Tesla doesn't have enough superchargers for all the demand they have. It depends on the region. I think that's kind of a blanket statement that doesn't really describe the situation perfectly. Like the closest supercharger I go to all the time has never been full. I've never once seen it full. I've seen it busy, but busy as in like half of the stations are full, but most of the time there's only two or three out of the, 20, 30 stalls available. Um, so in more rural areas, I would say there's plenty of capacity. In fact, there's still some areas that I know of where every time I go by that supercharger, every time I use that supercharger, it's practically empty. Almost every time I go. So in more road trip, more rural areas, I think it's very open and they can definitely handle the capacity, which is arguably more important because that's where more people are going to be DC fast charging. Situations where I have seen super busy superchargers that are probably not ready for opening up to new EVs are major cities. Primarily Los Angeles, I know, is flooded with EVs. And there were tons of times the last time I drove through there where I got routed to one supercharger, and then they had to change the route because they said, sorry, that one filled up. Now you got to go to this one. Oh, that one filled up too. Now you got to go to this one. And the one I did go to was at nearly full capacity. Almost every single station was in use. So well, yes, there is some truth to some stations are very busy and very crowded already. So people probably take pictures and videos of, look how busy this supercharger station is, and Tesla wants to add more people. That's ridiculous. Okay, in those regions, yes, but that doesn't mean it's not worth opening because there's probably a huge number of stations across the country that are nowhere near max capacity. And the hope, I think, is that people who are road tripping are going to be stopping in more rural areas and they're going to need, to top off. And having a supercharger as an option is a huge selling point and makes people more comfortable buying non-Teslas, which I'm totally fine with. In fact, I welcome that because when Tesla has more demand issues, they lower prices, they incentivize people to buy their cars, and they make the product a better deal, which I'm all in favor of. So, um, yeah, Electrify America is almost always full because on average half are inoperable. That's a whole separate problem. But yeah, I think that it depends on the region. So there's some truth to it, but I personally don't think it's wrong to open up the supercharger network. I think there will be some headaches, there will be some problems, but overall, long term, it's a great thing for all EVs that we're moving towards the NACS standard so that everybody's going to be able to access it. And I hope that 5 to 10 years from now, when I'm ideally still making EV content, we can all reminisce on. Remember that CCS port? That was crazy. Can you believe in Europe they're still using CCS? Oh man. Okay, now like I'm so sick of the charging network being a selling point. It should not be. That's not how gas cars work. You don't have to go to a Ford gas station or a VW gas station, and the VW stations aren't broken all the time, and the Ford stations are really fast at pumping gas. No, you just buy an EV and you can drive it around and plug it in wherever. That's how it should be. That's what I'm excited for, a future where we don't have to think or talk that much about charging infrastructure. I know that charging an EV battery is always going to be inherently more complicated than filling up a gas tank because you have to have communication protocols, you have to have charging speed limitations, and you can't just have all battery packs charging at the same speed because that damages them. And some EVs are going to support faster charging than others, so it'll probably never be as simple as filling up a gas tank. But I'm excited for the day where hopefully we can just get all EVs running on the same connector at least. That would be a big win in my book. Um, what's my opinion on EVs having a very small onboard generator to charge the battery in case it dies? I think that'd be a good feature. I think it's unnecessary. To me, that's like if you're talking about a gas generator. I think there are some EVs that do that. I correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the BMW i3 um, I think that's one of the. It's like an EV, but there's a gas generator inside. If you want to top it off with a little bit of gas, and that powers an electric. I think it's tackling a problem with the wrong solution. So the problem is you're worried about range and you have range anxiety and you're concerned that you're going to drive the battery till it's dead. Okay, that's the anxiety, that's the problem. One solution is to do what you suggested, which is okay, let's build in a little gas generator so that you can carry around a tank of gas or push it to a gas station in the event that you run out of energy. In my opinion, that's not the right solution. The right solution is to make EVs have such long range, such good battery management systems, and to further expand charging networks so much to the point that you don't have to think about it. Most people do not carry around a tank of gas in their gas car as a backup in case they run out of gas. The solution in that situation is there's so many gas stations around and the range is so good on gas vehicles that you're not worried about it because you know that you're going to get a little alert that says, hey, you're low on gas, and that you're going to have enough range to get to the next gas station. To me, that's the better long-term solution. That's like a band-aid on the cut, the gashing wound. It's like a giant wound we have, and you're like, let's put a few band-aids on this, and I'm like, no, let's stitch this whole thing up and wrap it up. Um, I think it's a better long-term solution because putting in a generator and making space for the diesel and everything, that's going to add to the overall cost. And that also sends a message to everybody buying the vehicle that, hey, we're still going to be relying on gas pumps if this thing is ever in trouble. And I don't like the narrative that pushes either. I like Tesla's approach of no, the solution is we need more charging stations and we need better range and better efficiency. And by better range, I mean over 200 miles. I don't mean 500. I don't think people need as much range as they think. But if you own an EV and drive it around for a while, I think you'll understand a lot more of it. Charger anxiety is much more real than range anxiety. I have the lowest range Tesla, and I still feel very confident in driving huge distances, and I'll drive through huge stretches of nothing where there's not a charging station for 100 miles, but I've got the range and I feel confident in the car, and I feel confident that the charging station is going to be available when I get there. So I don't have range anxiety. um, let's see. Don't electric vehicles already have generators regenerate braking? Someone towed their Model 3 and gained 50 miles to get home. Yeah, but that's not probably what he meant. I think he meant a little small gas generator. Um, Lucid really had my attention a year ago. We had conversations about it, but now I've lost hope for them. Tesla will definitely be my EV's brand once I'm ready to buy. Look at this. The minimalist digitalist in our chat right now. I remember, yes, Hasael and I had lots of conversations about Lucid versus Model S, and he really liked a lot of qualities about the Lucid. And simply because of Lucid's complacency, they're losing people. They're like, even people who wanted to one day maybe buy one and it was kind of their dream car material, you're losing even your potential future customers because of their complacency. To me, this is perfect example. This is perfect evidence that Lucid needs to do a fundamental pivot. They need to do a 180 on CCS. In my opinion, they should do a 180 on their range goals. Like, I know that that was their shtick and that was their hope, was that, oh, well, Lucids are going to be known for crazy high range. But if anything that we've learned from this whole EV startup space and this whole range game is that the max range number is not as important as people think. And you can try to make high range EVs, but if you can't build them at a profit, it's not going to matter. If people can't afford your fancy car, then what's the point? So, yeah, it's disappointing to see people lose hype in it like that. Lucid have no battery partner and no battery R&D like Elon has with Jeff Dawn, and Lucid has no manufacturing prowess to enable them to reduce production. Reduce production? I think they would want to increase, but I think you mean like profitably build vehicles. Will Tesla open new 72 kilowatt urban charging stations for third-party EVs? As far as I'm aware, no. There's people that know way more about this than I do. Um, Kyle from Out of Spec is who I listen to mostly just because he knows so much about all the different charging protocols and the connectors and the companies that make the cables and the connectors that Tesla uses, all of the little nitty gritty details. And the last I heard, he was on the Monroe podcast a while back. Or was it the Monroe? I can't remember. Maybe it was the Out of Spec podcast. But at one interview, he said that basically, in order to communicate with non Teslas, they have to use this communication protocol. It's called like ISO 811.2 or something really confusing that it's stupidly named. But there's a communication protocol that the superchargers need to have in order to communicate with the non-Teslas. And the way he phrased it was that the V2 stations do not support this protocol. So he seemed to be someone who knew a lot more about what they were talking about and had done a lot of research on this. And he said that only V3 superchargers would be opening for non-Teslas. So apparently that's about 12,000, because in all these announcements where EVs were saying, hey, we're going to offer a adapter for CCS vehicles next year, and then we're going to switch to NACS in 2025. Personally, I don't know why it would take that long. I have a theory in the back of my head. I don't know if you guys, I don't want to get your hopes up or anything, but if I was building EVs and I was using CCS, but I had a plan to switch to NACS, I would not put a firm date on it. I would announce like we're switching to NACS further out and then switch it sooner than people think. Because if you do put a specific date on it, like let's say Ford said, okay, with the F-150 Lightning starting January of 2025, we're going to offer NACS. So you don't need an adapter, and you can just plug into all these superchargers. And even Electrify America is going to be offering NACS 2 and everything. So you can just plug in everywhere without an adapter. Okay. If I was Ford, or if I was a Ford customer, I would notice that, okay, if January NACS is coming out, every month leading up to that January, you would get less and less sales because you'd have an Osborne effect where people are holding off on buying because they're like, well, I don't want to buy a F-150 Lightning with the CCS port. I'll just wait 3 or 4 months for the NACS version. So you keep waiting, you keep waiting. So as you get closer to 2025, your demand would really, really start to slow down and taper. So if I was Ford, this is a lot of speculation. I don't have sources or anything, but I would tell people that I'm switching to NACS in 2025 and then actually switch to NACS way sooner. Maybe January's too soon of 2024. That's when they'll probably start offering the adapters, CCS to NACS adapter, but as soon as possible, basically. I would start switching Ford vehicles to NACS like maybe March, maybe June, like mid 2024, and say, surprise, we have the NACS offering sooner than you thought, which is going to tick off all the people that just bought the CCS vehicles, but that's going to happen regardless, whether you do it in 2025 or halfway through 2024. You're probably going to tick off everybody. But um, I think I think it doesn't make sense to put a firm date on when you're transitioning to NACS because you're going to get a huge drop in sales leading up to that point. So if I was Ford, I would act like it's coming out later and then do it sooner than people think. I could easily be proven wrong on that. No sources, no one's telling me that's going to happen. I just am saying that would make a lot of sense. And personally, if you do plan on switching to NACS, I don't know why you would wait so long. Why would you hold off for that long? The connectors are available. Third parties can manufacture them now, so you don't have to buy the NACS connector from Tesla. You can implement it pretty much as soon as you're able at this point. So I don't know why they would wait an entire year. If you're going to open up the network in 2024 so that current Ford customers can use an adapter to charge, why wait a year? What's the what like just get it over with. Rip off the band-aid. Switch over as quick as you can. Thank you for the super chat, Taylor. That was very kind of you. Is the standard range Model 3 a smart purchase if you live in an apartment? Uh I have a lot of follow-up questions. There's a lot of it depends to that one. It could be if you're financially stable. In the first place, I tend to think that, okay, if you have an apartment, that means you're paying rent. If you're paying rent, you're probably got higher cost of living. I don't know. Maybe you live in an area where you have lots of money left over outside of rent. Um, but rent means that you're typically you're not putting that money towards something you're going to eventually own like you would with a house. So I would say buying a brand new car is probably not a great idea if you're renting an apartment, but maybe buy it used or something. But then the next question is, how close are you to a supercharger? If your supercharger and I'm assuming you can't charge at the apartment. That's why you're asking this question. Some apartments I have some relatives that have an apartment, and the apartment building offers EV charging. They have a few spaces in the parking complex where you can actually plug in your EV. I think over time that'll become more and more popular. I don't think long term the solution is going to be for everybody to DC fast charge, but like if you live 40 minutes away from a supercharger and it's not to a place that you work at or you're used to going to, it's probably not a great idea. But my my answer to that would not be, okay, you should get a long range. I would say you got to focus on your current living situation. I don't think an EV is what you need to work on. I think maybe moving towards trying to find a place that you can own might be smarter. Um, Instead of just pouring money down the drain with rent all the time. But uh, exclusively DC fast charging is always going to be more expensive. So if your logic with going with an EV is that, well, I don't want to pay for gas anymore and EV will save me money. Okay, if you're insisting that you need to get the long range because you're far away from a charger and you can't charge from home, that's going to push off your break even point, or as in the amount of time you'd have to own the EV in order to save money on it. And then if you're exclusively DC fast charging it, unless you're a YouTuber that can rack up a bunch of referral credits and get free supercharging, DC fast charging is probably going to be very expensive. In fact, depending on where you live, DC fast charging might be about the same price as paying for gas. There are some cities where that's actually the case, where the supercharging, most people are able to save money by driving an EV because they plug in from home during off-peak hours. And during those off-peak hours, you'll pay, even in bad places like California, 25 cents a kilowatt hour, which is definitely cheaper than gas. In other places, your off-peak hours could go down to 10, 15 cents a kilowatt hour, or in some places, I've seen it as low as 1 penny a kilowatt hour. There's some states where it gets that cheap. If you prove to them that you have an EV, you check for different rate options that are available if you're with your utility, your electricity provider, and usually they have some kind of EV specific tier. So to me, it kind of pushes off and kills a lot of the financial advantages of buying an EV if you can't charge it from home and you're not that close to a supercharger. Now, if you're really close to one and it's not too out of the way, then fine. Yeah, I would say even the standard range is fine. Um, and then but again, the next question is, okay, how much are you driving per week? If you're driving a lot, maybe that's going to annoy you having to stop and charge once. But I've had friends do that, and I've kind of done it as well, where you don't plug in from home for whatever reason because you can't plug in from home or it's too expensive, so you just plug into a public charging network. It's not ideal, but that's kind of the fun thing about Teslas is, when the car is plugged in and charging, you can run the air conditioning. They've got Tesla Theater. You don't even have to pay for premium connectivity. You can hotspot off your phone if your phone supports a decent amount of hotspot data. You can watch YouTube videos in the car. It has a great sound system. You can play video games. You can connect controllers. So if you just kind of look at it as an opportunity to sit back and relax, then yeah, the charging experience is very chill. It's very easy compared to going to a gas pump because the gas pump is just so quick. There's this urgency involved, and you can't keep the car running. So having the AC on, most people don't want to sit in the car and you're pumping your own gas. And because it's so quick, you have to kind of watch it and you got to swipe the credit card and everything. Whereas with a Tesla, you just plug it in and you don't even think about it. So, um, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a great idea, but yeah, I've basically been exclusively, spoiler alert, I've been exclusively DC fast charging for the past couple months. And it's a little bit annoying, I guess, to have to go out of your way to charge at a supercharger, but it's not the end of the world. I mean, what do you do at home? When you go home, you probably use your phone and watch TV. You can do that in the car while you're charging. So I don't think it's it. Taylor Karras, thank you for the super chat. San Jose rents. Ugh. Very, very expensive place to live. That definitely eats into the. But you're probably close to a supercharger. So the downside is supercharging is not that much cheaper than gas. The main cost advantage against gas is going to be charging from home if you can do that. But thank you for the super chat. Let's see. Does anyone know if Teslas have a feature that prevents the battery from dying in very cold temperatures like below zero? Yeah, I mean, it's called the battery management system. If you're in a super cold place, the car will use the management system, which is basically an HVAC. It's pretty much the same HVAC that cools and heats the cabin. In fact, you'll even experience it like when we were driving in really hot climates, like it was super hot outside. It was like over 100 degrees. Um, and they were trying to heat up the battery pack because the LFP battery pack is always running so cold. And I was driving to a supercharger, so it was preconditioning the battery pack. Um, the HVAC was getting a little bit overworked. So the air in the car was not as cold because it was using some of that HVAC resources to either heat, I'm pretty sure it was heating, but or cool the battery pack, depending on what kind of chemistry you have or what situation you're in. So when it gets really cold, there is usually a little snowflake icon that appears next to the battery because the main reason you're using more energy and the EVs get worse range in the cold. Honestly, all vehicles get worse range in the cold, but people are just more sensitive to it with EVs because they're known for having lower ranges. It's just that for one, the air is typically thicker when it's colder, so it takes more energy to push it out of the way. But also, you're using more energy to cool or heat the battery pack. In the case of cold climates, you're heating up the battery pack. So they build in for that. They say it's cold out, so your range is a little bit limited, but it's not substantial. I think in the latest round of range tests, they found that Tesla's lost the least amount of range out of all EVs because of their very efficient HVAC systems. Um, they're able to keep the battery pack warm enough to continue working. And there's tons of videos, not from me, but there's other videos online of people that are driving around Teslas and EVs in the like 30 below zero, 40 below zero. And sure, the range isn't as good, but they still function fine. In fact, arguably better, because you can, even if your Tesla is in a garage, there's no emissions, right? So you can heat it up from the phone, heat up the seats, heat up the steering wheel, heat up the battery pack without having to open the garage door and let in even colder air. And then you can get in the car. You don't have to start it. There's no ignition process. You just sit down and it starts and it moves, and it can stay warm even if you're parked without idling, without spewing out carbon monoxide the whole time. So I know my parents live in a climate where it gets super cold, and there's people that own Teslas in their neighborhood as well. So I believe they can do great in the cold, even the LFP. Um, on renting versus owning. With the current mortgage rates, it is usually cheaper to rent compared to property tax plus mortgage interest, which is the true cost that does not go to your principals. True. I mean, there's some principal, but uh, I guess it depends on the area. My point is, rent is basically pure interest payment, though. You're you're borrowing property to live in, and mortgage is usually a bit more fixed. Um, I mean, I'm not a mortgage broker. I don't have obviously a ton of experience with this, but I did buy my house, and you can pick a rate, and in the future, if interest rates go back down, you can refinance and get a lower rate. Yes, that does reset, so in the beginning you are paying a ton of interest, but you at least have a fixed price. Whereas when you're renting, uh there's not a ton of things that can stop the landlord from saying, okay, your lease is up, I'm going to raise the rent again. Whereas the bank can't say, okay, we've decided to raise your interest rate. Usually you lock it in, and early on your interest is pretty bad, but you can pay it off early is what I recommend people do. That's what we did. And then you actually own something, and it's working towards ownership, and then you own a property that is more valuable, that has probably gone up in value over time. Yes, there's property taxes, but uh, renting is going to be, you're never going to get that money back, and it could go up over time. So that's why I just try to encourage people to buy if possible. It's one of the, I rented for a long time too. And then once I realized how much money I could save, once I actually just saved up some cash, put some money aside, didn't blow all my money on stuff or on food and on drinks and on, whatever. And I saved my money and I lived within my means. If I had enough money for a decent down payment on a house, if you can do more than 20%, that means you don't have to get private mortgage insurance, which saves you some money. Yeah, even with a high interest rate, you can work towards ownership. But adjustable rate mortgages are a very common thing that I do not recommend. I didn't say you should get adjustable rate mortgages, but yeah, there's people that do that, but I would say it's not worth it. I would always recommend a fixed rate mortgage. Adjustable rates are kind of sketchy because the bank can kind of do what they want, but it's possible to not get those, just for the record. Um, renting's not fun, I know, but it's a we could do a whole different tangent on that. Would they improve that? What are you guys asking about? Sorry. Now I got the sun coming from behind me. I can't see the chat as easily. I got to boost the brightness here. Here in the States, we have no LFP Tesla for custom order. What? What are you talking about? What states are you referring to? All the Model 3s are still LFP for the rear-wheel drive. Um, I think all Model 3s and Ys in Canada have LFP. Oh, sorry. I gotta plug in my phone. I forgot. Doesn't have power. Thankfully, we have a 30-watt USB-C port in the center console somewhere here, which is not in the Highland because they moved it. So now I can power the phone and the MacBook simultaneously. I don't think you could do that with, well, I guess if you wirelessly charge the phone, you could power both, but I can't wirelessly charge it if it's up here. See, I've got the YouTube friendly Tesla. The Minimalist Digitalist says, I took a mini trip from NC to VA last weekend, the longest I've driven alone. For the first time ever, I realized what you mean about range. Finally, we've been arguing about this for so long. I'm so glad to finally hear that. After 200 miles straight, I was ready to get out and stretch. Thank you. Just do the math in your head. You drive 70 miles an hour. Okay, that's 70 miles an hour. Then after a couple hours, uh, you've gone 200 miles. You're kind of ready to take a break, right? Um, here, where are you that Portugal has 95% of mortgages are adjustable rate? Jeez. Yeah, those I wouldn't recommend as much. What interest rate did I pay on my house? I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I think it was three something. So yes, the interest rates are far worse now. I get that, but I don't think they're gonna stay that way. This is not investment advice. Do your own research, make your own decisions. If I could speak more broadly on renting versus owning, we rented for a long time too, but I looked at that as a good opportunity to save up cash for a down payment for when the interest rates were more reasonable. I would not want to rent a place and just plan on doing that forever. Um, and try to make a budget, try to set some money aside. Don't live paycheck to paycheck. It's dangerous, and um, it results in you being more trapped, I think, long term. Um, but we paid it off early, so it didn't really matter. We paid off our house in less than a year. I thought Lucid was going to just sell its drivetrains and battery packs under license. There was talks of that about them doing that with Rolls Royce, but I don't think that's enough to keep their business afloat. I think their company is burning way more money than what their powertrains cost. Have I noticed any sluggishness from the infotainment system over time with over-the-air updates from when you took delivery to today? That's a great question, Jordan, and I'm very happy to say no, actually. I'm playing around with it right now. I'm playing around with the maps and I'm zooming out and stuff. And it is still incredibly responsive. I mean, granted, the computer's not that old. I mean, this car was built a little over a year ago, so I wouldn't expect it to be laggy or sluggish. Over time, it might get slower. That's just kind of what computers do as they go through more compute cycles. But um, yeah, I can't say I've noticed any kind of like lagginess or sluggishness or same thing with the powertrain. Still great on all the fundamentals. The biggest problems with this car are tiny little cosmetic things. A little bit of wind noise here, a little creak there, a little wear and tear here and there, a little bit of creasing on the. Okay, it's always just the little details. That's what I think Tesla is known for. Maybe Porsche can be known for the company that focuses on the fine little details. Tesla can be the company focused on the big picture. Does the battery pack charge? Does the car drive? Is there a reliable charging network that lets you drive where you need to go? Yes, Tesla's got the fundamentals, but they are very sloppy and very lazy when it comes to the little details. That's, I think, the overall premise I get from Tesla. Their eyes are on the mission statement. We just got to be selling as many EVs as possible. That does not mean we have to sell the best EVs. All that means is we have to sell the most. They are very much. I love this analogy, even though some of you guys don't, but I'm going to keep using it because I think it's so good. Tesla is the McDonald's of EVs. They sell at very high volume, but they are not known for their highest quality. Um, but you know what? I like McDonald's. I think the food tastes good. I wouldn't say it's like the most highest quality food you could get, but it's reasonably affordable, like a Tesla, compared to other new gas cars. And it gets the job done. You had some good food, and you're well on your way. But you can overdose. Can't eat too much McDonald's. In the same way, you can't buy too many Teslas or buy into all of the promises Tesla makes. Just a healthy amount. I bought one Tesla in the past lifetime. And maybe 20, 30 years from now, I'll buy another one. Same thing with McDonald's. You go once or twice a year, and you'll probably be fine. And then Porsche fails the big picture. Yeah, big picture. I can't afford your cars, Porsche. I'm sorry, um, but I don't think that's Porsche's mission statement. I think a lot of companies, including Lucid, don't have mission statements that are about selling the most. Same with Apple, actually. Apple's a very big company, but nothing with their ethos or their ideology is we don't need to sell the most. We just want to sell the best. Tesla's mission statement is very much kind of about we need to sell the most. That's their goal. To me, a Tesla definitely seems like a luxury vehicle. Rode in one and thought it was nice inside. I'm with you, Jerry. I get attacked and people get mad at me whenever I say Teslas are luxurious because there's a bunch of people who have driven and owned much more expensive cars than me that all go, oh, I can't believe you call the Tesla a luxury vehicle. There's so much plastic. It's so cheap. But yeah, luxury is kind of a vague statement. There's not an objective definition. And there's people that review cars for a living that tell me, the Lyric is not a luxury vehicle, and the Model S and X aren't luxury vehicles. They're premium, but they're not luxury. Luxury, they reserve that for the Mercedes S-Class vehicles and, super high-end $100,000 vehicles. They say that's luxury. Tesla's just kind of basic. But to me, someone who drove around a 12-year-old gas car for many years, so it's no longer 12, it's much older than that. Um, that's turned me into more of like, yeah, anytime I get into a Model 3, even though this is the cheapest Tesla, I'm still like, whoa, this is so cool, the big screen. Like, to me, I guess it comes down to what is your quasi EV? You're the Diet Coke of EV. Who wants to live in a world without Coke? Yeah, pretty much. I still consider it luxurious based on what I've driven in the past. My first vehicle was a Ford Ranger from 2000. It had cloth seats. It didn't even have a headphone jack. All it could do was play CDs. It was rear-wheel drive. It was super slow. I loved it. It was a great little truck. I think it cost. I didn't even buy it. I was just driving it because my dad didn't need it anymore. But it was like three, probably maybe $4,000 when he bought it. He bought it used. And for a cheap car, that's great. I would say similar things to people thinking about wanting to buy an EV one day. If you really like EVs, but they're just too expensive and you can't afford them, I genuinely would not recommend getting into debt over it. Car loan payments can be a bugger, and that's a huge problem in this country. Is way too many people. We just had the last live stream we did here last week. There was a guy complaining about the car payments on his Plaid Model S, and I was like, yeah, I really don't recommend you do that. They can kind of bog you down, and it's not a good it's not a good position to be in when you're driving around something you don't even own. And there's interest on that, of course. The interest rates aren't good, of course. So I recommend driving the cheapest possible, yes, even used gas. If you can't afford to buy an EV right now, then I would say buy and get by. Try to get by with your current car, or if you don't have one, get a used gas car for as cheap as you can, and try to be practical about it. To get one that seems reliable. I'm not saying buy a busted up, totaled car. I'm saying buy a car that has not too crazy mileage and gets good fuel economy. Okay, like if you're gonna be paying for gas, try to pay for as little gas as possible, and that's what I did. I bought my basically bought my sister's old Hyundai Sonata, which had pretty good fuel economy, and it only cost $3,500, and I drove that, and I didn't take great care of it. I do the oil changes and stuff, but I wasn't buying any fancy attachments. I wasn't trying to pour a bunch of money into it, and I was gentle with it, and I didn't abuse it or anything, and I just saved up my money until I could afford the Model 3. So that's what I think is a decent approach. Um, let's see. I felt fine driving long distance in my Bolt because most of the fast chargers couldn't supply much more than 50 kilowatts anyway. I love that personally. There's some people out there that are road tripping with the Bolt, and people are like, oh, it's only 50 kilowatts. And some people are like, okay, we'll just take a little bit longer, but we'll save a bunch of money. That is so cool to me. Like you are comfortable living with less, and I admire that because it's to their advantage. They saved so much money by buying that cheaper EV, and it's still an efficient EV. Chevy Bolts still get pretty good range. That's the one downside of them is the charging speed. But if you're comfortable with that and you can live with that and just say, hey, you know what? I'll drive for a couple hours, and when I plug in, I'll just take a break. I'll walk to a restaurant and we'll get some food, and it might take a little longer to before we can get back on the road again, but I'll be saving myself thousands of dollars by going with a more affordable EV. Hats off to you, sir. That is wonderful. In fact, I'm so amazed by that I'm tempted to do it myself at some point. I'm tempted. I don't think I want to buy a Bolt because I've already bought this car and this car is great, but I'm tempted to someday. I want to know someone with a Bolt. I would like to do a road trip in one without buying one. It should be possible. Probably rent it or something. Sorry, no renting. Find a car with good fuel economy. Then how come you never advocate for hybrids? Well, the problem is hybrids are usually not that cheap. Um, I've never recommended a new hybrid for the record. I've been recommending, buy an EV or buy a super cheap used gas car, and the hybrids are usually not as cheap. If you can find one that's really affordable, I got nothing against it. Sub $10,000 or sub $7,000, and try it, make it something consistent and reliable. But usually the hybrids end up costing more, and usually hybrids need more battery service when they're used because they don't have as good a battery management system as a dedicated EV does. So there's a lot of hybrids out there that are like, okay, they're used, but the battery needs work and they need attention given to this. Um, Ryan says the Model 3 he was looking at has already been sold. Wow, that was quick. Um, yeah, who told you we don't have LFP in the United States? I'm sitting on an LFP battery pack right now. Lots of parts that can fail in the future, and repair is very complicated depending on the model. That's true. That's true with gas cars, and I would argue it's even more true with hybrids because there's more parts and more complexity to it. But um, there are gas cars on the road that have lasted decades. My friend Ross still drives around a Lexus that's over 30 years old now. And sure, it's had its fair share of issues, but he just, he tries to find the most cost effective way to repair little things here and there. But overall, it still works for him. Um, Jackson says, I got a white 2018 Mazda 3. I've got 2 years left on uni still. So I have quite some time until I get a Tesla. At least the refreshed Model Y will be out by then. Yeah, I saw someone asking that earlier. When is the Model Y going to get refreshed? No one knows at this point. I don't even think Tesla knows, but I don't think it'll be that soon. I think it probably won't get refreshed at the same time as the Model 3 in the US, and China will probably get it first, and we might have to wait till end of 2024, maybe even 2025, depending on where you are in the world. Um, Used Model 3s are $25,000, by the way. Honestly, okay, I do recommend usually people try to buy things in cash, but one caveat that I can kind of get behind is like, okay, maybe you don't have $25,000 lying around for a used Model 3, but if you're driving a lot and you're spending a lot of money on gas and you live in a region where you can charge from home and that the home charging rate is going to be pretty affordable, then I suppose getting a loan on a cheap Model 3 so that you can charge it from home. And if the loan payment does not exceed or is pretty close to the price you're paying a month in gasoline, all right. In that circumstance, it's kind of like buying a house, right? There's interest payments, yes, but you're working towards ownership. So there's a car loan payment, but after a certain amount of months, you'll eventually get rid of that. Hopefully you can pay it off early if you cut down on your expenses best you can. Um, that would be ideal. And then you don't have that monthly payment at all. But in that situation, I guess I can get behind it. But Future Devil Sniper was definitely not here for the beginning of the live stream. Hydrogen powered vehicles are stupid. I don't agree with a lot of things Elon says, but one thing I do agree with him on is fuel cells. Anybody who recommends hydrogen fuel cells has not thought about the situation. To me, there are people who believe in hydrogen fuel cells and people who have thought about it. There's two separate people. Hard to go for used when things are so affordable new right now with incentives. I don't know. Even with federal incentives, I mean, maybe if you're in Colorado, sure, Colorado has some insanely good state incentives, but $7,500 credit off your federal taxes, so not point of sale. The Model 3 rear-wheel drive is $40,000 before registration and fees and all that, and the sales tax. Some states you don't have to pay sales tax on EVs, but most of them you do. That's still going to be like, a $45,000 car once you're out the door. And then next year you'll get to write off $7,500 off your taxes, which is great. So maybe you can say, well, after a while that'll bring it down to sub 40,000, and maybe you get a $2,000 rebate or $3,000 rebate in your state. So that brings it down to $35,000. Okay, well, there's a lot of rebates and credits involved to kind of get it down to 35. At the end of the day, it's still not going to be as cheap as just buying a used Model 3, which we've seen some in inventory going for under 30K. So you save yourself the money a lot faster that way rather than a $7,500 credit off of next year's taxes. You just get straight cash because you didn't have to pay as much for the car. So to a point, yes, I would say if the used vehicle is only $3,000 or $4,000 cheaper than buying new, then it's probably not worth it. But if it's, if it's $10,000, $15,000 cheaper, then I'm not gonna say, well, buying new comes with certain incentives. In fact, well, that's something funny, Ryan, that I think more people don't know about is that inventory discount doesn't affect the MSRP. So when you see an inventory discount on Tesla's website, that doesn't mean that the MSRP is any different. So that can affect what tax credits it qualifies for. And the same thing with the referral discount that brings off another $500 or so. Um, Also, I believe there is a used EV tax credit if the vehicle dips below $25,000. I don't know everything about it. I probably should do some more research on it before I recommend it, but I'd recommend looking into that if you can find somewhere a Tesla Model 3 for under 25K. I think there's another $4,000 credit that kicks in at that point, which maybe when there's a Model 3 Highland refresh, we'll start seeing some older Model 3s in inventory get cheaper and cheaper. Tesla's just going to keep lowering the price until someone buys it. So if the desirability goes down for those older Model 3s and there's a lot of hype for the new one, you might get to the point where we start seeing some below 25K and then there's a $4,000 incentive, which it's not point of sale, it's still a federal credit, but it could bring it down to close to 20. Still, in my opinion, a lot of money for a car. Before this car, I was dropping 3 or 4 grand on cars. Um, he did a Tesla SE, yeah, $45,000 car or $10,000 used car, yeah. I bet you got to factor in the cost of ownership because no one buys a car that just sits around and does nothing. Um, so a $10,000 gas car that's going to cost you 200 a month in gas, yeah, you factor that into the ownership. Um, I agree with your opinion about hydrogen powered vehicle. Okay, cool. Thank you. I'm glad we don't have to go down that again. Housing market horrible. Cost of homeownership is at a 60-year high currently, and given current prices, it is cheaper to rent than own. Well, I mean, neither is ideal. I get that, but I don't think that okay, just for the record, the housing market, if the trends continue, which they usually have, real estate tends to just kind of go up over time. There are some instances where it goes down, but because it keeps going up, it will pretty much always look the worst it has always been. Now, the interest rates aren't helping with that, of course, but when all I'm saying is when we bought our house back in 2019, the market looked horrible. We were like, oh my God, look at what all these houses are cost. The housing prices have never been this high. This is ridiculous. This is crazy high. And when you buy the house is usually when you don't feel like the market is very good. But then a few years go by and you see how much worse the market gets. And that's when you start going, oh, thank God, we got a great deal on this house. I'm really glad we bought when we did. But at the time, it didn't feel like a great deal. I mean, it felt okay. We looked at several houses and we put in offers on, I think, 3 other houses that got rejected because we were offering too little for them. But there's just the housing felt crazy expensive. You see right there on Zillow what the pricing was just a couple of years ago, and you're like, oh my God, the housing is so expensive. But then a few years go by, and you start realizing, oh, okay, would have been way worse if we were in the market right now, opposed to a few years ago. Same thing happened with my sister. She bought a house in couple years later, 2022. No, when did they buy that? 2021. And at the time, the interest rates had gone up and the market had gotten far more expensive and far higher. And they were like, oh, geez. They had thought about buying earlier and they decided not to. And they were like, oh, why did we wait? The housing market is so much worse now. But then a few more years go by. It's a short term pain, but a long term gain, basically. That's usually the story I hear with most house purchases. In the moment, it feels crazy expensive and really unreasonable, and you're like, why don't we just rent? And then few years go by and you go, oh wow, glad we don't have to rate anymore. Housing only goes up. Long term only goes up. But there's some short term cases where it can dip down. But um, I don't. Renting is not a fixed price. That's my That's the difference. Mortgages, at least the one we got, and most of the people I know with mortgages have fixed rates. I know in some countries it's not as feasible to get adjustable rate mortgages, but um, at least that's something you commit to, and it's just like, okay, you agreed upon a price, and now you're paying off the loan. But when it comes to uh, renting, you don't get a lot of control over that. So you can't just say the rent I have right now is the rent I will have 30 years from now. Whereas with a fixed rate mortgage, at least the monthly payment you have today is going to be the same in 20 years. Um, so I know people are in different walks of life. I'm not saying no one should be renting. I'm just saying if you are renting, I would recommend putting some money aside and hopefully saving up for a down payment. I'm not rent shaming. I'm just saying that you should be aware of the fact that, like, when you buy a house and you're paying off a mortgage, yes, there's interest, but you're going to own something at the end of it. And it'll be far more valuable than what you own when you're done renting a place, which is nothing. I have friends, I have older friends too, that, family friends that are in their much older stages in life, in their 60s and their 70s. And they just decided, because they lived in a high cost of living area, I'm going to rent because buying is too complicated. And they did not have as much saved up for retirement. They didn't have as much money put aside. So you're basically forcing yourself to work a lot longer. And they get to a point where, okay, if you don't own a house and you got to deal with the infinitely rising price of rent, then you you're kind of stuck. Maybe your social security or retirement plan doesn't cover the rent, so you have to keep working longer than you want to. That's all I'm trying to do. Even if you disagree with me, that's fine. Just know my intention is to try to help people think a little bit about where that money is going, and think about an exit route, and think about the fact that rent is not set in stone. It's not like they have to keep it at a certain price. Um, Interest rates are so high, I'm getting priced out of what I would call livable houses. Yeah, I get the frustration. I totally do. And I understand that it's upsetting, but I don't think interest rates will always be this high. And while interest rates may be high on those home mortgages, rent is pure interest. You know, rent is pure money just going down the drain. You're not investing that money. Whereas, at least with the house, even if the interest rates are high, that money's going towards the ownership of something. And again, I don't think the interest rates will always be this high. So there's a decent chance you could refinance it in the future and get a lower rate if you're worried about that. But, you know, if there's a situation where the interest rates don't go down and they get worse in the future, then that'll probably affect the rent prices too. They're tied together. Power of Pickle says renting is fine as long as you have another investment vehicle for retirement that will be worth as much as a house. I'm trying to understand if you meant like investment plan or just a car, like a literal vehicle. Yeah, it's very hard to find cars that appreciate in value like that. But the price of the house at the end of the mortgage payment is most likely going to be much higher than the price that you pay today. Even though it may seem horrible today, it could get a lot worse. Because if you're not buying the houses, the landlords are, because they got more money, and then the landlords are going to be charging rent to cover the higher mortgage payments. So do your own research. This is not financial advice. I'm just telling you from what I've seen of other people. And maybe you're in places where buying a house is not feasible, and to that, I would encourage and implore the idea of maybe consider living a little bit further away from the major cities, or maybe living in a place a little bit further away that's a bit more affordable. May not be as close to all the concert venues or all the places you want to be at, but if staying that much closer to the city results in you having to work for longer because you can't afford to retire, which I'm sad to say I know people that are in that situation because they decided to rent their whole lives. I I feel bad for them. I don't want them to be in that situation. And they're basically kicking themselves right now, saying like, "Man, I wish I would have had a plan or put some kind of budget or some kind of money aside or had some path towards home ownership so that when I do retire, my expenses can go down, not up." Um, I just mean to invest in the stock market more aggressively. Okay, yeah, that's that makes more sense. But yeah, I get what you're saying. Some if you're planning on renting for life, basically, then yes, I would agree. There needs to be some kind of investment strategy that can sustain that because rent is not fixed. Rent is not gonna, even with an adjustable rate mortgage, at least you agreed upon a certain loan payment. Um, but yeah, I still don't recommend adjustable rate. If you can't avoid that, please do. So it's this. I'm probably out of my league. I'm sorry. I just I know people that are in these predicaments, and I know there's some younger people watching, and I try to keep thinking about it. If you're absolutely positive in your region that renting is cheaper than owning, then make absolutely sure, because there's there's this there's a certain degree of people that I think have convinced themselves of that without realizing it, and now they're going to be working a lot later in life. Anyway, uh, this is all true. What is Gregor Trek saying? Glad you guys bought. Oh, about real estate. Yeah. Current market cheaper to rent. It won't last forever. Well, the rent prices won't last forever either. But yeah, I'm priced out of my own country, New Zealand. Most young people, serious people, about their careers, leave, make heaps of money, come back, and make our housing the most unaffordable in the world. Yeah, that's really frustrating too. I've seen that happen in many places where, I mean, a classic example would be like Hawaii. How a bunch of people obviously love the climate, love the location. It's got the best weather I've ever experienced. I've traveled to many places and nothing beats Hawaii. Beautiful beaches, great water, great weather, just beautiful location, plenty of places to hike. It's just a really cool place. But that brought a bunch of tourists and a bunch of rich people that wanted to buy vacation homes there. So that pushed the demand way up, and now there's locals there that can't afford to buy houses because. So they've actually, I looked at this because I like looking at real estate pricing out of just curiosity. I'm not really in the market. I'm not planning on buying anything. I'm just curious. But I was looking there, and they actually have rules implemented in Hawaii for that now, where there are certain houses at lower pricing, but you have to be a local or a Hawaii native in order to buy the house. You can't just come in from out of the area and say, "Hey, that's a good price. I want to buy that." So they actually built in rules for that, which I think is probably good, so that the locals don't get priced out. Um, yeah, the live streams go off on too many tangents. I apologize. Yeah, I like what Nate G just said. He said, "Homeless on the beach." No, he didn't say that. I meant live frugal, be focused, save a down payment, take the plunge. I agree. Those are great bullet point advice. And if you're in a place where it's not possible, then just consider you might be paying for it in other ways. Okay, like if you don't want to consider moving to a more low cost of living area, I'm not some rich real estate guru. The reason I was able to afford the house I did is because I live in a rural area. I don't live in a major city. I'm not in, San Francisco. I'm not in San Diego. I'm in a pretty rural, far away area, but it's California. I'm close enough that within a couple hours I can drive to the Bay Area. I can drive within a day. I can drive to LA and San Diego, so I can visit those nice places. And I'm thankful that I was able to save up enough money to afford a nice car so that I can enjoy those road trips as much as I want to. But I picked a low cost of living area. Yeah, it might be a little more ghetto than what people are comfortable with, but if you're choosing to stay in those high cost of living areas and you have to rent because you can't afford to buy, you're you're paying in another way, because that means even when you're older and even when you don't want to work anymore, you're going to need some kind of other form of passive income, whether that's, what's your social security, or if you're working at a job that offers some kind of great retirement plan. How is that rent in the future, which is probably going to be much higher? How is that going to affect your livelihood when you get older? So you're paying for it in other ways. May not be okay. I didn't have to put a big down payment on a house, but yeah, be putting some money aside, please. You should look at the HOA on a Hawaiian property. It's astronomical. Oh yeah, I did. It was depressing, honestly. There were some houses that we looked at in Hawaii, not because we're interested, but just you know, it's fun to look at. It's fun to just daydream or something. What was depressing was even if we inherited some of these properties, even if someone owned one of those properties and we walked up to the house and we said, "Hey, we love your house. We don't have any money. Can we have it? Can you give me this real estate for free?" It's free real estate. Even if they handed us the keys to that property, we still couldn't afford it. Like just the HOA and the property taxes alone were so bad that we wouldn't be able to afford that house even if we inherited it from someone. Like that's pretty depressing. Not only can I not afford this house, but I couldn't afford this free house. You could give me that house for free and I still couldn't afford it. It's pretty depressing. Um I dropped my personal insurance on the car and it's now covered under commercial rental policy. Oh, how does that work? I don't know much about that. I know lots of people owning BMWs, Chargers, Mustangs, etc., but live in trailers. People prefer to buy cars to flex rather than a home because you can't flex your home at a McDonald's or Walmart. Yeah, that's unfortunately a pretty common thing in the US, I'm afraid. And I think that's another problem people experience with too is too high standards. Like they don't realize that okay, if you insist on your house having this or you insist on it being here or offering this that and the other thing, you price yourself out. But the truth is, like, I live in a pretty small house and I'm pretty happy with it because I realize that a lot of the time I spend at my house, I'm sitting at a table eating dinner or working at the office in a chair, laying down in a bed, or sitting on the couch watching TV. So a lot of our time spent in houses is just going from seat to seat to seat to seat to lay down over here. And yeah, I walk in between the two. So what difference does it make whether or not the house is massive, so you have to walk further to the bedroom and to the kitchen versus it's a little closer together? Yeah, I can get a little claustrophobic, and yeah, I can understand why people are like, it's not as great at hosting, but you can get a bit more creative with people being in the. Oops, the car fell asleep. You can get a little bit more creative with hosting get-togethers in the backyard and having more space. Like we have a little. The heck? Oh, my wife's watching a video and I think her phone connected to the car. That's funny. Um, we have a little burn pit in the backyard, so because the living room is a little small, we found a way to fit a lot more people around the burn pit. So we have people come over around the fire, and you can make s'mores and whatever. And we find you just a little bit more creativity can go a long way, I guess. Um, let's see. Can I live in your basement closet? Of course, that's fine. Uh, Rural house must be nice, really quiet, nice scenery, nice driving roads. Yeah, there's some downsides. I don't have a huge plot of land, so I got neighbors, and sometimes the neighbors do things that annoy me, but I have the flexibility because of my job and my low expenses to take long trips. That's something we really wanted to do, and wanted to prioritize in me and my wife's marriage was we've got lots of family members that live overseas and we want to visit them and we want to be able to take breaks. So it's important to us that we can, travel and sorry, I gotta really change this because I think my wife keeps playing the. How do I hit disconnect on this? She's trying to make it play, but I'm adjusting the volume down. Honey, shut off the phone. Oh, you know what I'll do? I'll switch to radio and then I'll mute it. Hopefully that'll fix it. All right. Um, let's see. It was me last stream with the Model S Plaid. I said I put the car on Turo with no age restriction for $80 a day. I'm hoping somebody totals it out. Well, don't say that. Don't say that on the record. I hope your name is not Tesla Teabagger on the account. Um, let's see. Um, when am we getting together for another podcast? We're still trying to figure out the scheduling. Everybody's got a bunch of stuff going on, so this is all I got for you right now. We don't have a date set. We don't know when everybody's going to be available, but oh, Technum Twin is in Hawaii and he's frustrated. He says, I'm spending $2,600 a month on rent plus utilities, but The bank doesn't think I'm qualified enough for an $1,800 a month mortgage, and HOAs suck. Yes, they definitely do. I'm sorry to hear that, man. That sucks. Yeah, I hate that people get priced out of places like that. Giovanni says, if these ridiculous ARK Invest valuations ever come true, I'm going to be able to afford a nice retirement somewhere in France or Italy. Yeah, let's hope so. Like I know I doubt robo taxis a lot and all that, but let's hope let's hope all of it comes true, because probably a lot of us here are Tesla stock owners, and maybe I could afford to move to Hawaii if those robo taxis and those Tesla bots take over. Have I considered moving states recently? Are you enjoying your current one? Yeah. Uh no, I haven't really considered moving. Probably I'm not going to say where. Uh there's places that I enjoy visiting, and there's pros and cons to every state. No one's going to shy away from telling you all the problems in California, but most of the places people move to, there's problems with them too, but people just don't know about them as much. California, there's lots to complain about because there's lots of people that live here. So everybody is very aware of all the problems. But what I find is a lot of the time people move to other states because they think, "Oh, that's not a problem outside of California," but then they move to that other state and find a new set of problems because not as many people were complaining about that state. So once they get there, they realize, "Oh, wait a minute, this gets more expensive and this is harder," and there's a whole different set of problems that unfold. So there's pros and cons to wherever, but the reason I like here isn't so much the weather or the location or the scenery. There's pretty spots pretty much everywhere in my opinion. There's some cool places to hike and cool places. Everywhere I go, I think there's a story, and there's some good places and places to avoid, and there's some perks and some disadvantages, but the main reason I like where I am is just the people. We have a lot of friends here. We've got a lot of family here, and I enjoy every minute I get to spend with them. And I think that's my best advice I could give to people is invest in people, not in things. Stuff is temporary. Stuff will disappoint you. Stuff will wear out. Stuff will shrivel away. But people and good, healthy, wholesome, long-lasting relationships, those are priceless. Just friends that stick with you, friends that care about you, and people that can listen to you, and hopefully you have that. I don't know if everybody does. Some people are in more toxic families or don't have very many close friends, and maybe that's a good opportunity to start fresh. Maybe if you don't feel very connected to a community, then that's a good reason to consider moving somewhere cheaper, somewhere more pretty, somewhere where you feel like you're less congested, there's less traffic or something. Maybe that's a good reason to try to find that community elsewhere. But where I live, at least, we just have an amazing support system of friends and family, and I've got grandparents and um, aunts and uncles, and so many people that I care about that it would just there'd be a lot of perks if I were to move to some other location with less taxes and less regulations and cheaper real estate. There's a few places I've looked at with way better real estate than here, and I've been tempted. I'd be like, oh man, if we move there, we could sell this house and we'd get a way better deal on that, and we'd have a bigger house and have more of this. And I'm like, that's all just stuff. What? Just so I can have a longer hallway between the living room and my bedroom, just so I can hear a little bit more echo when I'm talking in the kitchen. Is that really what I care about, or do I care about the people here? Do I want to be close to those? That matters a lot more in my opinion. Um I just moved from California to Michigan so I could pay cash for a house. Hey, there you go. Congratulations. That sounds fun. I hope you find a good community there. Let's see. Yeah, Drew, I see that as my only way out. It's covered by a commercial rental policy. At least if that happens, I can get out of it evenly. I'll eat my down payment. It's a shame. I do love the car. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, just let anybody rent it on Turo and you should be good. um, let's see. I think I've been live for a while now. Yeah, Alaska, that's where we're going. I'm going to wrap it up here. I've got some people reaching out to me. So I appreciate the super chats and the fun tangents, the fun questions. Sorry for Lucid and your all-time low stock. I hope they can pull it together, but I don't have much hope. Anyway, I hope you all Have a good day, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Take care. Bye bye.